We call opposition any relation in which at least two terms are mutually exclusive. Opposition is not only a feature that figures between, say, the colors black and white, or the concepts life and death, and other such concepts that we're familiar with. Opposition is the basis of relations and of motion. Only because what we perceive or think about is unlike us, or in a different state than ours, can we see it in the first place. As is familiar to us from Hegel, self-recognition and the recognition of others is identical. What we call other here is our own judgment as regards the object, a judgment that we've broken off from and transcended. What we perceive is, technically, what we've perceived, a previous judgment that we're now gazing at externally as a different situation. Self-consciousness only achieves its satisfaction in another self-consciousness. What this means is that knowing something is different from knowing that we know something, meaning that what we refer to as opposition is not exclusive to things like colors and seemingly absolute states of being like light and darkness, up and down, etc., but that it's the very substance of experience, of mental life. Thus we call opposite anything that we're capable of perceiving and representing to ourselves, whether in thought or physically, even if that thing were my own self, or a thought that I've just had. Opposition means that which is said to be opposite to myself is something with which I am, at that moment, involved in a direct relation. Opposition is that state from which things like relation and prepositions, acts and thoughts proceed or follow. None of these is possible without this ultimate standard of reference, as Samuel Alexander put it. It's not that opposition is a type or a mode of relation. Relation itself is already oppositional. The true and original state of opposition, before we get to things like black and white, positive and negative, is between the mind and its momentary and fleeting judgments. Since even knowing that light is the opposite of darkness requires putting my mind in a state in which both light and darkness are grasped individually in opposition to myself. In the much more rigorous language of Kant, experience both of the self and its object rests on acts of synthesis that, because they are the conditions of any experience, are not themselves experienced. It's not that there is some absolute fixed state in which the properties of two things are understood to contradict one another. Rather, the original statelessness of the mind, its instability that is, generates the very condition through which we're able to identify things and subsequently recognize our own acts of identification. Because at each moment, we let go and move on to different configurations of the mind. This is because, as said, the mind's true properties being in flux, of seeing and forgetting. It sees things and immediately sees that it sees them, repeating this rhythm with every aspect of whatever it sees. Those configurations, however infinite they are states, and motion before it translates physically is but this change of states, of ambulating or transitioning from one state to another. But those states must themselves stand in opposition to one another, for the subject, the mind, to be able to link them together, meaning that the phenomenon of opposition covers not only the mind and its object, i.e. its judgment, whatever it may be at the time, but likewise fills, as they say, every nook and cranny that stands between them. The formlessness of the mind is how it's able to perceive form. Now, as regards states of opposition as figures between male and female, left and right, hidden and apparent, those are like coordinates through which a specific process like reproduction or maneuvering in the case of spatial coordinates can take place. We see here very clearly that motion is generated in states of opposition. All concepts, whatever may be called a concept, are concepts of opposition. All things possess, as a rule, their proper fixed opposites, their indigenous contraries to which their own activity, as substances, may be interpreted as a kind of response or answer. The substance called male derives its very meaning, being, and function in the opposition which it shares with female. This is clearly expressed in the Quran in the following passage. The equivalent term pair here does indeed point, as held in popular opinion, to the sort of opposition which primarily serves a reproductive role. But this is true of all states of opposition. The thought you're thinking serves through your opposition to it, a reproductive role that allows you to draw from it the details and judgments with which it is pregnant. Zoj here is a term referring to the reproductive agency and role of opposition, and in combination with the expression shay, spans those other forms of opposition which aren't commonly thought of as such. That is, all concepts, whatever form they present themselves in, fall under the rubric of shay, and as such possess their productive opposites, Zoj. As a human being, you're defined by not only one mode or form of opposition, say with your wife or husband, but there exists such conceptual, let's say, opposition at every level of being. Male is as much of a shay as a man, tall, happy, old, etc. These are also ashya, since they're individual concepts. If we survey the mind and body, we will find that every part has its indigenous contrary with which it's intimately joined, and without which its meaning cannot be invoked. Every thought and every ingredient that forms it possesses an opposite on which its very existence and application depends, as is inhaling is dependent on exhaling. This concept of opposition naturally leads to another, very much as important, mimesis. The best way to understand mimesis is by looking at it as a mode of comportment. Things must first express opposition before any relation can take place. The expression of opposition is an indication of the mind's intention to represent the object to itself as accurately and as thoroughly as possible. And on this account, it can be said that the function for which the mind is chiefly known and prized, knowledge, is, in essence, but an act of copying or shadowing. We say that the object, in such occasions, is being comported with. Consider how certain states call out their opposites. How thirst, for instance, induces drinking, or fear, safety, or tiredness, rest. Random as might strike the viewer, the indulgent manner with which the thirsty drinks, the voracious manner with which the famished eats, the thoroughness with which the laws of physics are instantiated, the momentum with which a pendulum swings back to the exact position from which it was let go, or in fluid dynamics, how a liquid shapes itself in the best way possible in a medium. The liquid not only seeks to acclimate itself to the peculiar physical condition of its container, but it does so in the best way possible to it. Aren't these, then, cases of comportment? Alexander gives a brilliant description of this process. Every modification instances a moment of opposition, since every individual agent must, as Alexander notes, modify its action according to the qualities of the object, i.e. comportment, which in turn tells us that what opposition originally stands for is a sort of condition by which the appropriate response to the situation is furnished, by which the subject may acclimate to the peculiar circumstance of the object. It's called comportment since the subject of the act is the one making the adjustment. It's as if all things, given their composition, are wired to act and react in certain specific ways according to their stimuli. That these stimuli, again, by virtue of their composition, are designed to elicit and draw out specific reactions from their objects, and objects incur the modifications appropriate to the nature of their stimuli. We relate this to sujood by saying that sujood involves comportment. This is where the relation between sujood and ibada is shown. The opposition expressed towards the object whose intention is to copy it to the highest possible degree is different from the actual process of copying, where mistakes and shortcomings are typically inevitable. The former, the intention, is sujood. The second, comportment, is ibada. Hence the notion of forgiveness that we find to occur frequently in the Quran. Comportment can never be as perfect as what's first expressed by sujood. As in the case of the ball which the player throws or catches, there are a minutiae of things which the player cannot possibly factor in his reaction to the ball. Thus, what truly counts and matters is the purely subjective factor, that is, whether the subject is comporting themselves in the best way possible, and not whether the comportment is the best way objectively. As a conclusion, it can be said that sujood, being a momentary expression of orientation, points to said ideal reaction, that is, said best possible way of reacting to the object, regardless of whether this orientation translates to the same felicitous degree as would have been projected in the beginning. This goes on to show that orientation is originally and always superlative, though the action, the subjective act of comportment that is, may fall significantly shorter. The first devolves into a mere coordinate for the second.